Motor tics and stimming repetitive behaviors often leave parents wondering what is actually going on. You're not really sure, are you supposed to try to stop them from doing it? Is this sort of thing harmful for them? Or where is this coming from? Why did it start? While you might be hoping that they just eventually grow out of it, there's often a deeper neurological cause to these challenges that you really don't want to ignore. So that's what this video is for. We're going to explore the root cause of stimming, of motor tics. We're going to talk about how it connects to the nervous system and how you can relieve the stuck sensory tension in their body that is going to give them relief and help address these actual problems. This has been a huge topic in Thrive recently. We've had a huge increase in both our current patients that have had flare-ups and this sort of struggle, and then new people that are coming in dealing with some sort of stimming behavior, motor or repetitive tic-like motions. And you're going to hear me use those interchangeably. They're not the same thing, right? A stimming behavior might be a vocal thing, might be a hand flapping, might be a fidgeting, might be an oral fixation, whereas a motor tic might look like a neck spasm, a face twinge. It almost looks like a shiver sometimes. Those aren't the exact same thing, but we're lumping them together because there is a underlying neurological cause that is really the same mechanism for both of these. But regardless of what you want to call it and regardless of what it is, why is it taking place and how do we address it is really what our focus is. And what we've seen with both patients coming in and our current families that have been under care previously is that there's some sort of trigger that usually looks like an immune system stress. So they're underneath some sort of extra immune struggle, and that oftentimes has a PANDAS or a PANS connection, right? Maybe it's a strep infection that is triggering that. It doesn't have to be, but that is frequently the case. Or there's some sort of life stress, right? A parent is traveling, a negative life exposure, some sort of trauma trigger. And what that happens in both of those situations is it is ramping up the stress response in the body and it is depleting the energy reserves. It is exhausting their system, right? If you're fighting off an immune system challenge, if you're fighting off an infection, your body is being drained because it's putting a lot of energy towards that challenge. So, what do we need to understand here? Stimming is not just a quirky behavior, right? It's not something that you can just ignore, that maybe they'll grow out of it. It is their nervous system's actual attempt to regulate and to calm down. And where that's coming from is that they're missing that internally. I want to explain some of the science that's at play there. That's one of the points we're going to get to later. But we've seen some research and some studies with adults that maybe are on the autism spectrum or they've had a childhood where they've had stimming type behaviors. When they're able to verbalize what's going on, they talk about that as a self-soothing mechanism. And they'll talk about how, maybe a parent, a caregiver, a provider wanted them to get rid of it, but really it was a helpful thing for them. So you might be doing more harm than good if you're just focused on behavioral elimination without addressing that neurological cause behind the scenes. It's not just some little quirk or some weird thing that they're dealing with. Where is it coming from? What is triggering this? Well, there's two underlying neurological causes that really meld together to create the same response. What it is an overwhelmed sensory nervous system that creates a stress response, which is called dysautonomia, or an imbalance in your autonomic nervous system. That's a bunch of big words. Don't stress about it. Really what it means is it's the two different operation systems your body has. It's survival mode, fight or flight, or wellness, rest, digest. The fancy terms for that is sympathetic, parasympathetic. Don't stress about it. We call it gas pedal, brake pedal, right? Are you in fight or flight, gas pedal survival, or are you in a more brake pedal, calming wellness state? What happens with this tic response or this stimming behavior is there is too much sensory input overwhelming the brain that it turns on the sympathetic nervous system. It turns on that fight or flight response and it creates stress. It creates anxiety. It creates these behaviors that they have to respond with and compensate. So where is that coming from? There's this underlying mechanism that's called subluxation. That subluxation is a joint dysfunction that leads to abnormal input into your brain. Fancy word for that is proprioception, or your mechanicoreception, your body's perception of where it is in space and time. That sensory awareness is so important for your brain food. I talk about it as brain nutrition. That normal brain input or that brain feedback loops that your body should be having are coming from proprioception. So all the time, every single moment in time, all of us are taking in that information. When we have this subluxation, especially in certain areas, the upper neck specifically, that takes care of more sensory input than anywhere else because your brain really needs to understand where is your head in the horizon, are our eyes level. Those are hugely complex things that help us walk on 2 feet and do way more complex neurological functions than anyone else. All of that sensory input, if it's dysfunctional, creates stress. So instead of that good brain food, that good brain input, we have alarm bells. We have distress taking place all the time. So what that stimming behavior is doing is it's trying to seek out that input. It's trying to fill the gap really in what your nervous system should be taking in at rest, at baseline. When we don't have it from our own feedback loops, that's when you seek it elsewhere. That's where the stimming comes in. And the tics are similar, but I would look at that as instead of seeking to fill the gap sensory-wise, it's almost the blowing off of steam of that neurological input, right? If you're bombarded with SOS and alarm bells, it's like the tea kettle that boils over, right? You blow the lid off, it's blowing steam, it's blowing smoke, it's whistling, it's screeching, and that is what a tic response is. It's that twitch, it's that spasm, it's that motor response to all of this discombobulated fight or flight tone and tension in the body. So not just a behavioral thing, it is something that is happening internally that then we have to calm from an internal first perspective. Typically, what are the approaches that we handle this with? These aren't necessarily bad things. Like, I think there's some good in some of these approaches, even though they're missing the behind the scenes. The typical approaches you're going to come across if you're just doing your own research, you're Googling and you're searching this, there's going to be environmental modifications, right? If you can limit the environment stimulation, if you can make it less cluttered, if you can make it less noisy, if you can make it less overstimulating, well, if their internal system is already hardwired for overstimulation, if the external environment is even more of that, it's a problem. If the external environment is calmer, well, then we can get some relief from that stress. So that's one way, is calm our environment. Behavioral modification, swapping it out, can be helpful too, right? Giving a fidget toy, chewable jewelry, like a necklace that you can teeth with. There's a huge benefit to breath work, right? Slowing down, taking a deep breath, calms that stress response, turns on the vagus nerve a little bit more, and even gross motor activity, right? Letting kids bounce around, letting them jump on the trampoline, having them get that input in their nervous system from the gross motor activities. Those are all helpful things, but once again, they're still focused on the behavior instead of the underlying cause. The other ones that are maybe a little bit more advanced, developing some self-regulation tools. It's probably not something you're going to be able to do with your little kid if they're really dysregulated, but this would be stuff like, maybe a visual schedule to help them through the day without having as many transition frustrations or friction with those transitions. Maybe help them identify their emotions, give language to it. There's so many cool books and even cool kid podcasts that you can find that really help with that, and just having that self-awareness. Once again, that's hard to do with a kid that is really in this fight or flight state. Maybe they're on the autism spectrum. You might not be at a place where you could have that sort of interchange. But if your kid is struggling with this, but to a less severe degree, you can talk through it with them. And parents, also check yourself, right? Make sure you don't need to work on that self-regulation. You need to work on that pumping of the brakes of your own neurology as well. So the last step in that sort of self-assessment way of what you can do as a parent yourself would be seek professional help, right? That's what ABA therapy, OTs, they can be really helpful for developing a game plan. Those are all good things. Modifying your environment, replacement behaviors, making sure you're teaching self-regulation, and the OTs, the ABA, that can be helpful, but you've got to address the root cause, right? All of those are trying to work on the behaviors or the symptomatic expression of this, not the behind the scenes. And that is really the focus of neurologically focused chiropractic care. We're trying to calm that sensory input. The adjustment regulates that sensory processing system. It corrects that joint dysfunction, right? We talked about earlier that negative feedback loop that happens neurologically when we have that stress coming in. It bombards the brain. So if we correct that joint dysfunction that leads to the negative proprioceptive input, it calms that cycle and it pumps the brakes. It brings that balanced state back. And so both we are calming the negative input into the brain, but also we're turning that vagus nerve back on, right? The vagus nerve is the calming side of your nervous system, that brake pedal, and it comes out of the base of your skull and it runs by those first couple cervical vertebrae. So when that dysregulation or dysfunction is in the upper neck, it has a greater impact, both because of the sensory input that's up here, as well as the way that vagus nerve can calm the stress response as well. So we got to address both of those. Pump the brakes, activate that vagus nerve so that we don't have just gas pedal, we can turn that brake pedal back on as well. The scans are so helpful for that too. The insight scans we use at Thrive, they let us actually measure and see where are we at neurologically. And then as we go through our care, what's changing, right? We'll do those progress scans and see what's different. Make sure that your kid's making progress and heading in the right direction with that. Parents, yes, we want to see the behavioral, the emotion, the tic or the stimming change, but you've got to address the behind the scenes to get to that. Hope that helps. Let me know if you got any tics and motor stimming or any of those questions along these lines, and we are here for you. Can't wait to see your family soon and help you thrive.